I had met Baba originally in 1954 in the pages of a well-known book that was written by an Englishman, Paul Brunnan, who had visited India several times in the 30s. The book had been reprinted and was available in the United States, and it was in the 50s that I read these two chapters about Baba. I was attracted to Baba, but it was on a kind of a negative note, because although I liked what I had read, I had also agreed with part of the summary that Brunton had incorporated in his book, which was that Baba was a religious genius, but he wasn't what he claimed that he was, that is, the avatar of the age. A few years later, I met Paul Brunton himself, and after some time, he was leaving the United States. A few years later, after I had met Paul Brunton and had become his correspondence secretary, I visited Myrtle Beach for the first time. And Kitty Davy, I recall, had told me in her letter of invitation to come to Myrtle Beach that she would like me to read something at a Tuesday meeting and that I could pick anything that I chose. Well, at the time I wasn't convinced entirely that Baba was what I had heard that he was, mainly because of the summary that I had read in Brunton's book. Well, I had chosen a chapter in one of Brunton's book called The Fruits of Philosophy, and I read this at a Tuesday meeting. And looking back in retrospect, I was amazed at the tolerance with which I had been received down there. Well, I spent my first weeks at Myrtle Beach, absorbed some of the atmosphere, was introduced to the innumerable books about Baba, and began to get a look at the other side of the opinion on Baba. And by the time I got back to New York and I was deeply involved in the book God Speaks, I remember distinctly the night when I was reading it and my wife Vivian came up to the room and I interrupted what I was reading and I said to her, "You know, Viv, Paul Brunton can't hold a candle to Meher Baba." I mean, I was fascinated by the metaphysics because this was purely an intellectual approach, and the depth of it alone staggered me, the depth, but yet the simplicity. And, well, I think from then on, I was hooked. So the next year, we went back to Myrtle Beach when Vivian was doing a portrait of Elizabeth Patterson, and we had a couple of experiences down there that seemed, well, coincidental or miraculous. I won't bother to go into them now. And I began to get a different feeling about Baba, so much so that at that time we were preparing, or there were notices in the air about a proposal that Baba might have for visiting him in 1962, and this thing hung over our heads until 1962, when eventually we visited Baba and saw him for the first time at Pune. We also had some other experiences there with Baba, particularly my wife, but for myself, I remember that prior to the trip to Pune in 62, I wanted to tell my father, who lived in the West Indies, about Baba. And each morning when I would come home from work, or I worked in the night shift, I would write a little paragraph or two about Baba and incorporate it in a letter that I had proposed to send to my father. But then I got the idea that I would put this thing on tape also. And the tape turned out to be a very interesting tape. And somehow Baba heard about this tape before we got to Pune. And his message to me through Mani was to bring him one of these tapes. Well, in fact, I took 2 tapes for him, and I left them in Pune. He just acknowledged them. Perhaps he may not even have acknowledged them, but Eric certainly took them and put them at Baba's side in the hall at Merazad. Well, Baba may not even have acknowledged them, but Eric certainly received them and put them at his side on the couch in the hall at Merazad. Well, the next thing I knew was a few days later, I think after the general meetings had ended, was that Mani called my wife at the hotel where we were staying, and she told her the incident of Baba playing the tapes, or the tape for all of the Mandali. And later, Minu Karas, who had written me from Pakistan, told me that Baba had asked him, well, what did he think about the tape? And his reply was that. And then later, Minu Karas, one of the Mandali who had listened to the tape in the hall at Guru Prasad, had written me from Pakistan, saying that Baba had asked him after the playing of the tape, what did he think about it? And he said that he thought it was superb. Well, of course I was pleased that Baba had appreciated the efforts that I had made, and that tape subsequently was made about 50 more times separately by voice recording at home in Brooklyn and sent to people who had heard about it. In retrospect, as I look back, I often wondered where some of the phrases came from, because I had been tired when I got home in the morning, certainly not in a fit mental state for doing justice to a subject like that. Nevertheless, it turned out well, and we had been pleased. After that, I remember that I had written Brunton that since I felt that I wanted to devote all of my time to Baba, would he please release me from my commitment to handle his correspondence? And I remember particularly a dream that I had after I had written that letter to Brunton, but before I had received a reply from him. In the dream, I had a dinner meeting with Brunton, and Brunton said to me, I received your letter. It was very well worded. Is that what you think about him? By him, of course, he meant Baba. And I said in the dream, yes. And that was the end of the dream. I don't know what we were going to have for dinner that night in the dream, but that was the end of the dream. And shortly afterwards, I got the letter from Brunton, and the essence of his letter was, well, what do you recommend that I do? To this day, I regret that I never replied to that letter, because in a sense, I thought it was a facetious question. I think to this day that I should have answered him, and that I should have said, well, let's try and make a trip back to India together, and let us see if we could present ourselves to Baba, even though Baba was in seclusion. Well, that was the end of my association with Brunton, whom I must credit with my introduction to Baba, and for whom I must profusely thank for my present attachment to Baba. It was, as I call the whole incident in a story I wrote in an article later. I've never had any special experiences with Baba, though my wife has had, and I've witnessed them, and I'd prefer that she would tell them herself. Except on one occasion, I received a letter from Artie, his secretary, who said that Baba wanted me to send certain books to a rabbi out in Detroit, whom I'd never heard about. Well, I sent the books to the rabbi, and in one of the paragraphs to the rabbi, I'd said that, well, Baba had struck me as being the most outstanding person I had met in my life of over 50 years. And this, in fact, is quite the truth. How I'd come to this conclusion is quite a mystery to me, because it wasn't any overnight chemistry that had happened to me. As I said, I didn't have any special experiences with Baba. It was more like a slow osmosis of the truth that Baba was what he said that he was, and I accepted it. And today, I try to live my life, though with many failings, I must confess, according to the many things that Baba has given us to enable us to live a proper life. All the trivia that used to capture my attention no longer bother me. I think about Baba as often as I can, trying to devote myself to Baba. I read books about Baba, and I get rid most of the time what Baba used to call the bogus news, because the real news is the news that is contained in Baba's discourses and Baba's simple statement, I am what I am. This is Vivian Agostini again, and I just wanted to refer to Brunton's reply to me after I had returned from Pune, the 1962 visit, when I had suggested that I should be relieved of the correspondence that I was attending for him. And in the letter, Brunton had referred to his meeting with Artie many years ago, that's in the 30s, and he had said about his book, which was still in circulation after a good 30 years, that if he had had the opportunity to write the book again, he would do it differently. Now, he didn't indicate what he really meant by that. I don't know whether he meant that a mature sense of reflection would have perhaps led him not to use the harsh criticisms that he had employed in describing or talking about Barber. But I certainly felt that he would have done it differently also. And but whether he would have gone to the extent of acknowledging Barber, it would be a matter of pure conjecture. I really don't know how he felt.
I am Vivian Agostini. This is the studio where I designed the Barber medal. And I'd like to tell you just a little about it so you have an idea of what's involved in the creating of a medallion. First, of course, perhaps I should go back and say what it was that inspired me to do it. Well, I'm sure I don't have to go into this in too much detail. I'm positive that everybody who has ever met Barber, who's ever stood in his presence, is well aware of the great privilege that I have had in doing his portrait. To begin with, apart from the great beauty of his countenance, there was that unforgettable grandeur of expression in his eyes that was so overpowering. It was so brilliant. It was so full of light that when I first met Barber, I stood transfixed. I remember distinctly, I was way in the back, in with the group. And Barber was quite a distance away. And mind you, Barber was not even facing me. I stood and only looked at his profile at that time, as I remember. His gaze was directed in an entirely different direction. But I don't know what it was. As I looked there intensely, Barber suddenly turned around with great force and stared right at me. He knew that I was gazing intently at him. But that look was so magnificent, and it cannot be explained in words. It can only be felt. And then after my visit, of course, quite a very, very interesting experience has happened to me when I first was in Barber's presence. But it's only when I returned back to the States and I could not forget this magnificent countenance that it occurred to me what a marvelous thing it would be if I could capture some of that through my art, which is sculpture. Of course, at first I thought of doing a portrait in the round, but that was a little difficult because I did not have enough photographs at that time to work from, and besides, it would have been much better if I could have done that while I was there in Barber's presence, which of course couldn't happen. Now, the next thing, at one time I remember looking through many photographs of Barber, there was one photograph of a profile. Of course, it's always easier to do a portrait of a sitter, of a subject, while you're in the presence of the subject. But that being impossible, naturally, since my stay there was so short, but the idea never left me to do the portrait, one way or another. So when I returned to the States and browsing through some of the beautiful photographs that I came back with of Barber, there was one in particular that struck me as being very powerful and very beautiful. It was a profile. And so I thought, now, I'll try a bas-relief. A bas-relief is simply doing a sort of a a modeling of the subject, but not in the round. It's flat, and the projection sometimes is very low, no more than a quarter of an inch or 3/4 of an inch, and so on. It isn't, but it is not in the round. It only takes in only one angle. So I started to work on, first it was a few bas-reliefs that I made, large size. I was not too happy with them. I felt that I did not yet get the spirit of Baba that I was hoping to portray, as difficult as a thing like that is, naturally. However, I worked very intensely, and then the thought while working occurred to me, well, why not design a Baba medal? So, with that in mind, I made the model. It has to be, in order for a medal to be created, the model is generally 10 inches in diameter. This is the mold of the model I was working on. First, I finished the model. It was cast in plaster, a reverse mold made of it. The mold is sent to a special foundry where metals are struck. It's like a coin. And there it's reduced. It was reduced to 1 3/4 inches. But it's reduced it's accurately with every single detail in proportion. And that is how it finally resulted in the creating of the Baba medal. Quite a number have been struck, several hundred as a matter of fact. And it was very gratifying to me to get those various letters of praise. All I know is that I worked exceedingly hard and made many, many copies. I think I produced, before I finally was satisfied with the results, I think I made dozens of photographs and at least 6 different versions before Louis and I thought that that was the best of all of them. But now I think I should pause a moment and go back to even before my meeting with Baba. I remember so distinctly my first impression of Baba's beautiful countenance. There was so much power there. There seemed to be, he was permeated with so much light and so much love. That impression never left me. It grew and grew, and I felt before I left that I must get permission somehow or other to do Baba's portrait when I came back to the States. I spoke to Mani about it. She in turn told that to Baba, and he said yes. He certainly does give me the permission to do his portrait. When I came back, however, I felt that I had not enough material, enough photographs to go by, because to do a head in the round, we must have many, many different angles of the sitter. However, I came across one photograph that was so beautiful. It was a photograph of a profile. And then the idea occurred to me, well, why not do a bas-relief of Baba from that photograph? A bas-relief is like an extension. Rather, it's no more than a drawing in clay, as it were, but instead of being in the round, it's about 1/4 inch or so projecting from the background. I worked on that. I made many, many drawings. I did quite a number of bas-reliefs before I got to one that I thought was quite characteristic, and I stuck to that. I did it in the size required for a medal. That is, it had to be 10 inches in diameter. When that was completed, my work, that is, my model, that was sent to the Medallic Art Company. They do medals only, and they reduce it in size from the 10 inches in diameter that the original model was. They went down to 1 3/4 inches. It's done quite mechanically, but not a detail escapes. It's done absolutely in proportion. They do all the medals. It's simply like a coin.
Yeah.
After many months of complicated work, the medal was finally completed. And we sent Baba the first medal that was struck. I remember Mani writing me of how pleased Baba was, and also saying that that it is one of the best portraits that was done of him. Subsequently, there were many, many medals struck, several hundred as a matter of fact.